Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep, looks good, Kaitlyn.
Perfect. We'll just give it a minute and let people filter in before we get started. All right, I think we have quite a few folks in here, so we'll go ahead and get started. And if more folks filter in, we can, they can just pick up where we're at. But again, excited to share with you all some current market research that's hot off the press from our national counterparts. We just learned of this or got this updated research in February. So I'm going to kick things off with a little bit about who we are and what we do, as well as then move into some of the market research surrounding really what are consumers looking for, what are their perceptions surrounding beef, and different things that drive their decision to ultimately purchase beef, whether that's at retail for at-home consumption or whether that's through food service. Obviously, purchasing, whether it's through an on-farm market or a farmer's market or something like that, is probably of most interest to this group. But I really find this research in general kind of fascinating to see what's driving consumers' choices when it comes to beef. We also then will shift gears into some Northeast specific research. So every couple of years, our program heavies up on market research just to see, are consumers in the Northeast kind of, where are they different and how are they varying from the total US in terms of beef and beef consumption and different challenges and concerns. So to start off, our program, the Northeast Beef Promotion Initiative, also known as NEBPI. So if I reference NEBPI throughout the presentation, you'll know who I'm talking about. But we really serve and extend nationally developed beef checkoff messaging and content into the heavily populated Northeast region of the country, where there's minimal state beef council presence to cover that population. So you'll see there on the screen, our territory is Maine to Virginia. So what makes our region unique? We always like to kind of set the stage with this and just put it into perspective. Obviously, we're all from and reside in the Northeast, but oftentimes we're not thinking of this. So we're home to nearly 74 million consumers, which equates to about a quarter of the total population. We're also home to 4 of the top 10 metro cities. So New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. From our program standpoint, how we're funded through the beef checkoff, only 3% of those dollars are collected within that 12-state region. So you'll see there's kind of that disconnect between dollars and then the consumer population. So that is why our program is funded through the national checkoff, that national 50 cents. And as I mentioned, there's 6 states in the region without a state beef council presence. So that would really be that grassroots in the state organization really serving beef producers. So that's where our program steps in. Although we can't call ourselves a beef council, we really act kind of as that liaison, ensuring that beef has a voice within the region. To put this into perspective another way, that population density, there's 15 people for every 1 head of cattle within the Northeast. So those 12 states, Maine to Virginia. This is just a high level showing how the beef checkoff works. Sure, some of you are familiar, but anytime that an animal is sold, $1 is collected and 50 cents goes to the qualified state beef council if there is one, and then 50 cents goes nationally to Cattlemen's Beef Board. So our program is funded through that national 50 cents that flows through Cattlemen's Beef Board. And then it's relevant in the Northeast, those states without a qualified state beef council, the whole dollar would be going to Cattlemen's Beef Board. So every year we put forth a funding proposal and present that every September. And our program, this is the 17th year that it's been funded and doing work on beef producers behalf in the region. So shifting into kind of today's beef consumer and, where are they at? So it's no surprise to any of us that we are seeing historic price levels, supply chain issues, and just general uncertainty about the future. Consumers have continued to turn to beef during this time for a reliable and valuable protein source, which is exciting. Demand for beef products has remained strong, and consumers have repeatedly claimed that they will continue purchasing beef, like I said, both in those retail and food service settings. This just shows, and I'll preface this with, all of this research is done on behalf of the Beef Checkoff. So it's done on an ongoing basis. Every day there's consumers filling out surveys, and this data is tracked kind of on an ongoing basis, just to give you that perspective. But there's three main factors that drive consumer demand, and those would be consumption, preference, and value. And then those are further broken down in those 5 categories: eating experience, convenience and versatility, price, raised and grown, and then nutrition. And you'll see kind of what factors, what demand drivers fall into each of those categories. So I'm going to share with you guys some insights surrounding all of those demand drivers. So starting out, consumption of protein, a large majority of consumers, and this data that I'm sharing now is for the United States as a whole, but obviously there's folks represented from the Northeast region. So just keep that in mind as well. And later on, we'll dive deeper into specifics surrounding the Northeast. But a large majority of consumers are eating beef and chicken at least once per week. And it's important to note, we hear a lot of buzz about meat alternatives, but folks who are eating those alternatives at least once per week are still frequently eating a variety of other meat proteins, including beef. So I often think of, in the Northeast, we just have much more readily available options. So I think that's why we're seeing some of those higher consumptions of meat alternatives in the region. But it's good to know that folks who are seeking those out are also still turning to beef. The yearly per capita consumption in pounds of beef, it's expected to be potentially a little lower in 2023 due to some supply chain issues, but you'll see there in 2022, it was just over 59 pounds per year. So we're going to dive into the first demand driver, the eating experience. So you'll see, no surprise, beef in the turquoise line and chicken in the yellow in terms of protein ranked number 1. No surprise that beef and chicken are continually neck and neck. We do have a slight upper hand at the moment, so that's exciting to see. And then you'll see pork and those other meat alternatives fall lower down to the bottom. And then in terms of at-home eating, over 3/4 of meals are being cooked at home, and those who are cooking more at home plan to continue to do so. So this is something that we saw really take a rise during the pandemic. More folks, they had no choice but to cook and eat at home. All breakout rooms will close in 50 seconds. Hopefully that's not the case. So that's exciting to see that more folks are eating at home. So how can we help, ensure that more of those meals at home are beef, and how can we, arm them with some education on how they can incorporate beef? And then in terms of where are folks turning to purchase beef to prepare at home, so you'll see there consumers are obviously most frequently purchasing beef from the grocery store to prepare at home. But I would be curious to see if we did a deeper dive of this question in the Northeast, I feel like farmers markets and direct from a farm would probably rank a bit higher, just because there's just a higher apologies for that. There was some sort of setting that was glitching, so hopefully you guys can still hear me, see me, and see my screen. If someone can just say yes, that'd be great.
Yes.
Beautiful. So like I was saying, it'd be interesting to see, and perhaps we're going to add this to our Northeast Heavy Up in the future, just to see what that percentage looks like in terms of consumers purchasing beef direct from the producer. And then when you look at—
Can I ask a quick question
Sure.
to that? The data and the charts you're showing is 21 and 22, which are total anomalies in terms of the market behavior because of COVID. So I'm wondering, if there's older data available, and then to compare that to 2023, which we won't be able to do till next year, really. I just feel like this is vastly skewed data just because of the inability of consumers to act in their normal shopping behaviors for the last 2.5 years, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our national counterparts do have this research from a historical perspective, and that's definitely something they're going to look to do, once we have 2023 under our belts, and see, how has some of that shifted. And throughout, there are some notations of, how things were prior to what they are now. But I agree, there's definitely behaviors have changed and they haven't gone back to what they were before. So that's a good point. In terms of what beef items are consumers gravitating towards and what have they eaten in the past week at home, no surprise that steak consumption and purchases is trending downwards, while consumers are stretching those beef purchasing dollars. So there is a slight increase in ground beef and other cuts. So that's just interesting to take a look at. And then when asked, in the next 6 months, what are you planning on doing, or what are your habits? What do you anticipate they look like? And you'll see, kind of related to some of the economic factors right now, just looking for deals or using coupons, less dining out, which again correlates to what we just talked about of their intent to eat more meals at home, stocking up and freezing items more, and finding ways to use leftovers. I think those last two are kind of opportunities for folks who are direct marketing their product. How can you, help educate folks, maybe new customers, about how they can stock up by purchasing in bulk? And maybe, on social media, you can share fun ways that your own family is, cooking with beef, and how you're utilizing leftovers. Beef continues to perform better than chicken when it comes to taste. Again, no surprise, you'll see that historic data, that's always been the case. And now shifting into the next set of demand drivers, the convenience and versatility, as well as price. When you look at perceived price increases, over 2/3 of consumers note seeing higher prices for steak and ground beef. They really do attribute it to inflation, supply chain issues, and the overall cost of production. But you'll see there, no surprise, we've all seen, the situation with eggs and other products. So again, just being aware of that. And then when asked, what are you planning to purchase more of or less of? 1/3 of respondents plan to purchase less steak, and plan to purchase more ground beef and chicken. Again, perhaps just an opportunity just to be aware of, and perhaps just educate about, how you can, some of these items might come at a higher cost initially, but how can you repurpose some of those and make more meals out of one item. You know, if you grill a steak one night and there's leftovers, how can you utilize it the next day?
I think this is a really crucial point. Sorry to
Yes.
jump in here again.
Yep.
The profitability for most of us is in the steak cuts. The ground beef cut out in the carcass is the cost covering portion. So this is a huge impact, and you know, giving people recipes is not going to solve this for us necessarily, right? This is the erosion of steak prices, and especially in the grass-fed sector, is a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Nope. Thank you. In terms of looking at that versatility, over the past 3+ years, consumers have consistently indicated that they perceive beef as better for a variety of meals compared to chicken. To me, that's not surprising given the variety of different cuts of beef that are available comparatively to chicken. Next, shifting into the raised and grown demand driver, and just due to our time constraints today, this is kind of a condensed version, but I can either drop it in the chat or send it to Jen to share with you all. On beefresearch.org, there's a full breakdown of this research in further detail if that's of interest. In terms of overall perceptions surrounding beef, this is data from 2022. Over 2/3 of consumers have positive perceptions about beef. Chicken has a slight edge in terms of positive perceptions, but when you shift gears into production perceptions, those kind of are pretty similar in terms of consumer sentiment around that. And then in terms of consumer knowledge, when consumers are unaided and asking them, are you familiar with how cattle are raised? Only 27% self-identify as being familiar. Yet I think it's important to note that 71% consider how their food was raised and grown when making those purchasing decisions. Again, just another opportunity to share that story, have that personal connection with your customers, which is something that, all of your business models is built upon. So I think we have that advantage in the Northeast, just connecting with those customers on more of a personal level really helps put a face behind how their beef is raised. In terms of what is the number one concern without giving them options, really unaided, would be they don't either have no concern, or the top concern that they do have is surrounding animal welfare. In terms of who do they look for or look at as credible sources of production practices, you'll see there veterinarian is number one, but a producer is number two. So again, I think that just speaks to the trust that people have in producers. In terms of consumers have higher trust in the people who raise cattle compared to those who raise chicken. You'll see that's been the trend for quite some time. This chart goes back to Q4 of 2018. And then shifting gear into that last demand driver, nutrition. Beef is currently holding a slight advantage over chicken in terms of consumer perception around nutritional value. You'll see there it's historically gone up and down in terms of who has the upper hand at what time. So it's exciting to see that we're holding ground. And I'll share here in a moment that we do know folks in the Northeast really put higher value on the nutritional attributes of the food that they're choosing. Consumers continue to perceive beef as a great source of protein. You'll see that trend has maintained for quite some time. In terms of future consumption of beef, consumers do plan to eat more beef due to its taste. And then reasons that they would eat less really center around price at the moment. So I'll pause for a minute. Let me just take a minute to check the chat. And we'll roll into some of these specifics surrounding Northeast data that we did. So we do have historic data on this. The most recent that we did was August of 2021, and we're looking to repeat this study again in 2023 to see, so prior we had done it in 2019. So August of 21 would have been our first touch point, after the pandemic hit. So there was some shifts that we saw. So we're kind of waiting to see, 2023 and beyond, how has some of that continued to shift and change. So the Northeast State Dashboard specifically looked at New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, Hartford, and Washington, D.C. We also have, if anyone is interested, you can reach out to me and we can send you the full recap. We also did a deep dive into Pennsylvania, New York, and then we grouped some states together and have more of a New England look and so on. So we're more than happy to share any of those learnings with you guys. So key findings from heavying up on this consumer insights within the Northeast. We know that consumers in the Northeast are eating beef, less beef weekly than the total US. And then perceptions of beef are less positive in that, especially around versatility and safety. And then Northeast consumers claim new recipes and information on how cattle are raised could encourage more consumption, an increase in the frequency of them choosing beef. And nearly half of consumers are ordering groceries online at least monthly. And this is a behavior that most definitely was correlated to the pandemic, but again, really isn't relevant to you all. In terms of recommendations that came out of this research was, how can we really continue to share beef's positive story and highlight its great taste and health benefits? And as consumers are shifting to eating more meals from home, really just connecting those dots for them and what hurdles they may have in terms of, storage, preparation, buying beef in bulk. And I'll touch on a resource that we have here in a bit, the Northeast Beef Directory, but we do have some of those resources available on there. And then I know folks like yourself are doing that on a daily basis, educating consumers about, if they purchase a quarter of beef, what does that look like? How much freezer space do they need, and so on. Like I mentioned, the Northeast consumes less beef on a weekly basis than the total Northeast. So you'll see that represented here in a visual format. And then in terms of their knowledge of beef production, the claimed knowledge that people have around how beef is produced is pretty on par and similar to the total US. The thing that's important to note is kind of that movable middle, folks that are somewhat knowledgeable. How can we kind of move them and shift them into feeling more knowledgeable about how beef is raised? Perceptions of beef and beef production, as I mentioned, are lower in the Northeast, but perceptions of production are kind of on par with the total US. Again, that movable middle is pretty substantial. So kind of ensuring that we sway those people to the positive as versus to the negative is obviously key. This is a handout that we have that, again, you can find it on our website, northeastbeef.org, but it just recaps what are those considerations people have when, choosing their protein of choice in the Northeast and things of that nature. So if that's ever of interest or help to you, you can find that on our website. As I mentioned, we have the Northeast Beef Directory. So this was created back in 2017. So it really came out of, we were going to a lot of different consumer events in metropolitan areas representing beef, whether it was at a marathon, at a consumer health and fitness event, whatever it might be. A common theme and question that we kept receiving was, where can I buy beef direct from a producer in my area. I'm in Maryland. We didn't have a turnkey answer for folks. Again, with the checkoff, we're representing all producers. So we set out to build this directory and have one place where we have resources surrounding, hey, here's all the different beef choices and the way you can purchase beef. And we've built the directory to be, or built it up. It's over 280 producer listings representing all 12 Northeast states as of now. And this resource, having it built, having it primed and ready, has always served us well. But I will say the traffic and uptick in the directory on our website since the pandemic just skyrocketed. You'll see there I have some insights since October of 2022. So our fiscal year runs October through September. So within this fiscal year that we're currently in, 12% of all of our website visitors are driving themselves directly to the beef directory. So it's continued to be an asset to us. It also provides us the opportunity to interface with producers within the region. So if there's anybody on the call that's interested in learning more about, how you can be listed on the directory, it's simple. We have just a form that you fill out with all your information, and then we get you added. I'll also put a plug in. We're doing a Northeast Beef Directory or producer workshop here in April. We're hosting it in Hershey, Pennsylvania, but really just looking to bring producers from across the region together for a day-long workshop. Just really encouraging you guys and sharing again some insights on marketing and just how the checkoff can be an asset to you all and what you're doing day to day, getting beef to consumers in your backyard and your areas. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll check the chat here and see if any have come in through that way. But as I mentioned, you can learn more at our website, northeastbeef.org. And again, as the checkoff, we are available whether you guys need cut charts or if there's anything that we can provide for you, whether you go to like a farmer's market, if you have an on-farm store, whatever that looks like, if there's any resources or infographics that we can provide, we'd be happy to do so. So with that, I'm going to take a look at the chat. If you have any questions, you can feel free to unmute or drop them in the chat and we can facilitate them from there.
Hi, Kaitlyn. Nico Horster here. I've put a couple of questions into this thing. So as a grass-fed producer, I've always felt that the beef checkoff and the national and regional beef consortium really has not paid attention to us as producers and or our market segment. And your presentation, while detailed in a lot of ways, corroborates that. There's an increase in market segment in the grass-fed beef over the last years, which has been significant, and yet the national organizations have not followed in their data or are not presenting it that way. So my question is really, can we drill in this data a little bit deeper than the sort of broad overviews that you gave us, which, while they were interesting in comparison to, the meat alternatives and other meats and, knowledgeable education of consumers, really what we continue to struggle with as grass-fed producers, and, this being a pasture-based conference, is really, how do we get support from national organizations like the beef checkoff programs to promote the particular education of the nutritional value and production methods, which are way more sustainable, and outside of the critique that is leveled at the feedlot beef industry, rightly so, in terms of their climate impact, which is really where a lot of consumers are starting to focus, particularly when you look at the meat alternative, you know, vegan propaganda stuff that we're getting, which has its own issues. But people, you know, there's definitely education to be done there. So look at the questions in the chat. They sort of have a little bit more detail in terms of what I'm interested in and seeing in data in terms of marketing our products. Thank you.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing the chat, so perhaps Jen needs to filter those through to us. But I appreciate your feedback, and can certainly, I'll inquire with the folks on the national level who conduct that research that I shared the majority of, and see if they have the ability or how the questions were posed, if there is the opportunity to kind of further drill down. Essentially, I mean, from our standpoint, we're here to support you in any way that we can. It gets a little tricky in terms of we're representing all beef, all production methods. So like you mentioned, of course, you're represented in that. But it gets tricky in terms of what we're allowed to say and not say as the checkoff in terms of USDA oversight. So we can't, you know, say one is better than the other. Really, our role is how can we educate consumers about these are the options available to you, and really empower them to make the purchasing decision that reflects, you know, what is important to them, what is best for their family, and so on. So basically our role, we can just lay out, here's the different options available to you, and kind of just empower folks to make that purchasing decision based on what's important to them. But yeah, we're here to represent you and support you in any way that we can. But I will certainly follow up in terms of within that data, is there any separation, or can we drill a bit deeper into traditionally conventional beef versus grass-fed beef?
Yeah, I think what we thank you for explaining that a little bit. I think we're sort of at a similar path, or split in the path that we've seen in the dairy, organic versus conventional dairy, in terms of profitability, in terms of market access and consumer acceptance. And we're seeing the same thing starting to happen in the beef market, particularly because that's where a lot of the sort of carbon footprint stuff has been focused in terms of the discussion. And I think if we don't proactively analyze that data and educate and counter steer, we're gonna have serious marketing issues for beef as in general overall. And I think there's a real failure of the national organizations. They've been asleep for the last decade and are reluctantly, I think, waking up to this. I don't know why. Maybe it's because the industry is dominated by relatively few large producers in terms of aggregation. You know, maybe less so in the Northeast, although Cargill, you know, operates plants here as well. So maybe it's a little bit of a monopoly situation as well that sets the agenda for what gets researched and how the data gets aggregated. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute.
Oh, we're almost out of time anyway, right? Yes, 2 minutes remaining. Well, thank you, Kaitlyn. I really appreciate you presenting this data. It's interesting to see that. Yes, I would be very interested in the whole reports looking through this. I'm also on the board of the Vermont Grass Farmers Association, and we we continue to struggle with marketing on a more regional level, and are always looking for good data that breaks down, market access and community education stuff. So that would certainly be helpful if you could hand that through to Jen, and it'll filter down to me for sure.
Yeah, not a problem. And if you'd like, if there's a way you can just chat me your email address, I can even follow up
Oh
with
yeah, totally.
the specifics as well. That's helpful.
Let me do that right now.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.